I'm not new to Shenandoah, but I'm not a local either. I've hiked Old Rag twice and knew the route well enough to feel confident going alone on a weekday in late October. I wanted the leaves before the first frost shut down the best color. I bought the day-use ticket online, printed it, and set it on the dash. I parked at the Old Rag lot nears a little after 9 in the morning, shouldered a small pack, 2L of water, a rain shell, first aid kit, a snack, a paper map, and told myself I'd be off. The ridge before the afternoon fog, the forecast mentioned. I had read the bulletin at the kiosk, slick rock, poor visibility, likely after one. I planned the standard loop up the ridge trail and down the saddle trail to Weekly Hollow Fire Road back to the car. Nothing fancy. I wanted a steady climb, a careful scramble, and a quiet walkout. The trail was lively at the start, college kids from Charlottesville, a couple in matching jackets, a father and teenage son talking about the rock scramble like it was a rite of passage. We leapfrogged one another through the lower switchbacks until the grade steepened and the chatter spread out. That's where I first saw him, about 20 feet off the trail, standing still under mountain laurel, a faded orange beanie and a hunter green jacket, hands jammed in his pockets. He didn't look at the view or his feet or the blazes. He looked right through the line of hikers and didn't move aside. No pack. I gave a quick morning out of habit when I passed. Nothing came back. I kept my pace on the blue blazes and tried to let it go. People come out for all kinds of reasons. Some are quiet, some don't like talking. I stopped near a low quartz outcrop to retie my right boot and drink. I set my pack against a flat rock. When I picked it up, the sternum strap had been renapped through the whole loop in a way I never do. The plastic edge carried a thin gray film, the kind you see when tape has been pressed on and peeled off. I didn't want to make a scene out of nothing, so I filed it as an odd detail and moved on. In a damp patch where the trail cut a shadow under brush, I noticed boot prints. Most were the usual oval patterns. One set had a right heel with a missing piece like a half-moon gap cut out of the tread. Once I picked it out, I kept seeing it on the inside of turns and at the shortcuts where boots bite into softer soil. I didn't stop to study them, but I started noting landmarks and times in my head. Stone staircase at 10:20. First squeeze at 10:50. I passed the same college pair again near a slab where the rock tilted like a slide. When I glanced back down trail, the man in the beanie had drifted forward again. He kept an easy distance that never closed to conversation and never opened enough to lose him. The ridge got quiet after the first real squeeze where you use your hands. The couples and casual hikers dropped back. The scramble features fell into place like they always do. The steel handhold, the narrow chimney you face in and work up, the wide slab everyone calls the whale back. Wind brushed across the granite and left shallow films of water that made shoes chirp. Each time I paused to let my breath settle, he appeared again, never hurrying, never looking winded, and still with no pack. I tried a test I use when someone seems off. I stepped well to the side at a pull out and asked, "You all good?" He didn't answer. He stopped 3 body lengths away, angled like he wanted to be between me and the down slope. It wasn't a misunderstanding about who had right of way. It was a statement. I'm here and I'm not going around you. By 12:40, the fog arrived from the west the way the bulletin described. 1 minute there was a horizon and the next it was gone. Visibility closed down to 30 yards. The last voices I'd heard were far below. I made a cautious direct line across a wet boulder field to see if a different route would open space. It wasn't smart in that weather, but I picked my feet and moved slow. A minute later, he traced the same line. I saw his right heel print in the thin smear of mud on a granite dish I had stepped on 90 seconds before. That was enough for me. I didn't want to wander the ridge looking for a problem, or create one by scrambling off the known tread. So, I did the most boring thing I could think of. I called Park Dispatch. I didn't bother with coordinates. I described what I could see without turning in circles. Blue blazes on rock thus cleared the steel handhold. Narrow chimney behind me, approaching the whaleback slab. Visibility 30 yards. Solo male in a faded orange beanie, green jacket. No pack. Maintaining distance and copying my route choices. I put the phone on speaker and kept it in my chest pocket. The dispatcher was steady. They asked me to keep moving toward the Saddle Trail junction and to narrate the big features out loud so they could clock my progress. A ranger team was coming up from Bird's Nest number 3 shelter. If I reached a post with paint and a mileage placard at the junction, I should stop there and not step off into the side gullies where the fog pulled. Talking to no one felt strange, but it kept me from going quiet and making a dumb decision to sprint. I said what I saw. Stone staircase with a crack on the right riser. A shallow pool on a flat, a granite bowl that catches water and drains slowly. I heard my own voice and kept it level. Every time I paused, he stopped behind me and angled to keep the downhill on my bad side. He wasn't posturing, he was managing position. I repeated the details for dispatch. No pack. Right heel with a half moon missing. Jacket looks matte, not shiny. No emblem visible on the beanie. The dispatcher asked if he had said anything to me. I told them no. She told me the team was close and to hold at the junction post if I reached it first. The post rose out of the fog like a fence stake 30 yards out. I crossed open slabs slow and set my hand on the wood so had something real under my palm. I told dispatch I was at the junction. The man took one step closer than he had all day. I saw his jaw move like he was working his teeth. I didn't try to talk to him again. I raised my voice and said, "I'm on the phone with dispatch. Rangers are above and below. I'm staying by the junction post." He tilted his head, but didn't back off. He moved to my right. I turned with him and kept the open rock on my left so I had room to move if he rushed. I heard boots before I saw anyone. 2 shapes came in fast from the ridge side. Green uniforms and ball caps, one calling my name. I raised my left hand and kept my right on the post. The man turned like he meant to slip down the granite ramp toward the Saddle Trail, but a third ranger arrived from below and pinned the exit. They told him to show his hands. He hesitated 1 beat, then put them out. Everything after that was simple because they made it simple. They patted him down. Out of his jacket pockets came zip ties, a roll of duct tape with the leading edge dirty and frayed, nitro gloves, and a folded sheet of paper with my license plate number written across the top in thick marker. Under mine were partial plates and notes that looked like making color. One of the rangers asked if anyone had touched my pack. I told him about the renap strap and the gray residue. He looked at it and told his partner to bag the strap for prints anyway. He didn't promise anything. He didn't dramatize it, he just did the steps. They set the man between 2 of them and walked us down the Saddle Trail. The fog thickened in pockets and thinned in others. The granite stayed slick. I fell in behind the 3rd ranger and did exactly what he told me to do. Hands where he could see them when we crossed steeper spots. Eyes on the tread. At Bird's Nest number 3 shelter, they paused to radio a status update and confirm a deputy was waiting where the trail met the fire road. The man didn't speak to me. He didn't struggle. He saved his words for the rangers, and they saved any response for the bottom. At the junction with Weekly Hollow Fire Road, a Madison County deputy was waiting in a marked truck. They separated me from the man and took a statement. I gave times and features and the order of things. I said where I first saw him standing off the trail. I explained how the crowd thinned as the scramble began. I told them about the strap and the residue and the way he stood 3 body lengths away and drifted to my blind side whenever I stopped moving. I showed them how his right heel left that missing half moon on wet patches. To hikers who had passed us lower down stopped and told the deputy they'd seen a man with no pack lingering near pullouts and watching people try the hand-hold section. The deputy photographed my pack where the gray film still showed on the plastic edge, then turned to the rangers to log the items they had taken. At the lot, I sat on the back bumper of the ranger truck while they finished their radio calls. I kept my eyes on my car and then passed it to the trees beyond, not because I expected anyone else to come out of them, but because my focus needed a fence. The ranger who had walked behind me said they were active warrants out of 2 states for someone stalking weekday hikers on popular trails near Skyline Drive. He didn't say the name. He didn't share details beyond that. He told me my choice to keep moving toward a known junction, to talk out loud, and to describe landmarks made the intercept faster. He asked me to save my call log and write down my times that evening while they were fresh, because they match up better than memory 3 days later. A week later, an officer called me. The man had been booked on the warrants. Additional charges were in review. The items he carried matched reports from other trail incidents, and my notes helped tie a few dates together because the weather and the route were consistent. The officer thanked me for calling early and not trying to solve it myself by sprinting off the blazes into fog. The conversation didn't last long. It didn't need to. I made a few changes after that. I bought a small inspection mirror and started using it to check under and behind my car before I get in. Not because I'm expecting anyone, but because the 30 seconds it takes to look is easy. I don't go alone on weekdays when fog is in the forecast. I keep doing old rag, but I pick clear days and normal hours, and I accept a little extra company on the scramble. I still carry a map and a headlamp and a small kit. I still step to the side for people coming up. What stays with me is how ordinary the day looked. A bright knit cap, the same blue blazes I've followed before. A Tuesday with a calm trailhead and a steady climb. The ridge didn't do anything unusual. The rocks were wet, the visibility dropped, and the air felt like it always does when the clouds sit down on the mountains. Nothing strange needed to happen. One person used the quiet, and it was enough. There wasn't a mystery to solve or a story passed down by locals. There was a man who favored the downhill side and kept his hands in his pockets and followed close enough to be present, but not close enough to force a scene. It ended the way it should. He was arrested on existing warrants. The pattern that had been creeping along the park roads met a wall. My habits changed. That's it. I think about the junction post more than anything else. It is not even much to look at when the weather is clear in the fog with my hand on it. It felt like a fixed point. I didn't have to be clever. I didn't have to know anything beyond my feet in the next blaze. I just had to stand where people would be, say what I was seeing, and wait for the shapes to come out of the gray. When I pull into that lot now, I sit for a moment and watch the brush line and check the mirror and get out with a simple plan in my head. Follow the route, respect the weather, speak up early, the rest is noise. I grew up going to Great Smoky Mountains National Park with my family. The kind of trips where you take photos by the old churches and walk the loop road at sunset to look for deer. Cad's Cove always felt safe to me. Paved, open, familiar. My cousin felt the same. We learned the park rules early. Hang your food, keep a clean site, respect quiet hours. We weren't first-timers when we booked a late-season campsite in mid-November. We knew the cold thins the crowds and slows the woods down. Bears tuck away. The campground goes half empty. We drove in on Laurel Creek Road, checked in at the little station, and the host gave the same talk I've heard since I was a kid. Firewood from here, not from home. Use the bare cables. Quiet hours are real quiet. That was fine by us. We came for that kind of silence. We set up fast. The air was sharp, and you could smell leaves giving up the last of their color. Our site sat a short walk from the loop road, far enough from the bathrooms to feel private. There was a big tree blow down about 30 yards into the trees, not far from where the campsites give way to the open field. We pitched a small dome tent, stacked a neat pile of wood, and ran our food up on the bare cable as soon as we finished dinner. We even went over our safe word like we do for hikes. Say it once. Wait for the other person to repeat it. It sounds goofy until you actually need it. The only plan for the night was to sit by the fire and relax. The only mistake we made was thinking the quiet would stay the kind we knew. It started with pacing just beyond the circle of firelight. Not fast, not heavy. It moved like a person who didn't want the trip in the dark. Slow and careful. I've heard deer before. Light, quick, a little clumsy when they spook. This wasn't that. The steps were spaced too far apart and too regular. The sound made a slow oval around us. Every pass cut the edge of the light a little closer. We looked, but the trees were a wall. After a few minutes, it drifted off, and the night settled again. We kept the fire up because cold sneaks in faster when you let the coals die. We told each other it was a coyote testing the border or a stray dog. We said that because it was easier than saying what we both felt, that the quiet had someone in it. Sometime close to midnight, we heard a long thin whine like a branch flexing, not the crack of a brake. The sound you get when weight presses down and lets up without snapping the wood. It moved a little at a time. We took our headlamps and swept past the blowin'. For a second, two eyes caught the beam, not the green flash I've seen in raccoons, and not the red I've seen in deer. These reflected clear and white and too far apart, like they didn't belong to the same head. Then they dipped below the log in one smooth motion, like whatever owned them slid and tested the cover. We didn't say anything. We just let the beam die and listened to the pacing start again. The circle was tighter this time. We let the fire burn down to coals because bright flames can make you blind to the dark beyond them. We put the iron grate across the ring and rad the logs low so they would throw sparks if the wine picked up. Then we went into the tent and pulled the zipper down with a practiced hand. The air horn sat between us where we could both reach it. The knife I carry for camp chores rested on my knee. We didn't talk. It's not that we were scared yet. It's that talk felt like a rope you throw into the dark, and I didn't want anything pulling on it. Wine wasn't moving. The tent didn't flap. The only sound was our breath, and then after a long stretch of nothing, the small metal tick of the zipper slider flexing inward. If you've camped in a dome tent, you know the sound of the zipper. This wasn't it. This was the slider being pushed from the outside like someone was working at it slow and patient. It would move a half-inch and stop. Wait, move again. I held the horn in one hand and the knife in the other and leaned close enough to feel the nylon cool near my face. I said our safe word loud and calm. The word came back to us from the other side of the nylon in a voice that sounded like my aunt if she had a sore throat. The word came clean, same tone, same rhythm. Then the voice said my cousin's full name with the middle included. If you're wondering, no, we hadn't said it that day. We hadn't said it in months. Hearing it come out of the dark without a single step or a single breath to carry it made me go still in a way I don't like thinking about. The zipper ticked twice more. I pictured something using a small hook or a nail to lift it a bit at a time. The voice kept trying the names like they were keys that would fit if it found the right lock. I didn't blow the horn right away. Inside a tent, that blast will take your ears and spit them on the floor. We waited for the next pull. When it came, my cousin shouted the safe word and I hit the horn. The sound tore the air. The tent boomed from it. Out in the dark, the steps changed. The slow circle broke into a short skittering rush that crossed to the blowdown and stopped hard like it hit cover it knew well. We didn't chase. We didn't unzip. We sat up with our backs together and stayed that way until the gray side of the tent told us dawn had finally picked a side. At first light, we came out and worked the camp like it was a fresh crime scene. The zipper showed 3 small scores above the slider, little bright lines where something had lifted the teeth with a point and tested the lock. We walked past the blowin' and found the source of the branch-strain noises. Whatever had moved around us had crossed on fallen limbs without breaking them. Testing with weight and then pushing off gently. 30 yards out in the leaves, we found a buck. It was dead, half buried in leaves like it had been cached, not eaten where it fell. The front legs were folded backward in a way I don't know how to describe other than wrong. There wasn't much blood on the ground. The head wasn't torn off. The body was intact, just sat there under a light cover. We looked for prints because that's what you do. There weren't any clear tracks, only shallow divots in a wide pattern, like something big tried to step light and far apart at the same time. We took photos. We marked the spot on our phones. We packed our camp clean and tight. On the loop road, we waved down a ranger truck and showed him what we found. You learn to listen to the way a ranger talks when he's concerned, Short words, careful sentences. He went with us to the carcass, looked at the legs, and lifted the leaves with a stick, the way you'd open a closet you weren't sure about. He came back to the tent and crouched by the zipper, put a finger near the little scores, and looked at our faces like he wanted us to say something first. He didn't use a name for what we saw. He radioed for wildlife without making a show of it and told us to secure our camp and be ready to check out. The volunteer host came by on a golf cart and spoke quietly to other sites down the loop. No drama, no sirens, just a calm suggestion that they relocate closer to the entrance station. A wildlife tech met us near the entrance and kept his voice neutral. He asked the kind of questions that matter: where we stored food, how high the bag was on the cable, what time we heard the zipper, whether we used scented wipes, whether anyone near us had a dog. He looked at the photos. He took a good long look at the scores on the zipper and nodded like he had seen that exact thing before. He gave us a half-sheet printout with a paragraph about unknown scavengers and late-season behavior. He didn't put a species on it. He didn't have to. He took our names and said someone might follow up. We didn't ask for an autograph or a story because this wasn't that kind of moment. We checked out and drove the loop once because habit is strong, and then we went home. A few days later, the park put out an update, not a press release with flashing lights, a bland notice on the site, and the bulletin board by the loop road. It said there had been animal activity near the campground. It said access to certain loops would be limited after dark for a bit. It said to secure food and report unusual behavior. The notice didn't say what kind of animal or what kind of behavior counted as unusual. You could read it and think raccoons. You could read it and think bear. You could also read between the lines if you had ever sat in a tent and heard your name and your aunt's voice from the other side of thin nylon. The part that tied it off for me came a week later. A hiker we met on our way out sent a photo with the time and the GPS stamp. It was the same buck. He found it dragged to a new pocket of leaves nearer to the field edge. The legs were still wrong. He said it smelled sweet and sour for a second and then the smell was gone, like it got pulled away. He said he heard nothing and left fast, and I believed him. You can say what you want about coyotes or cats or bears moving a carcass. I've seen those. They don't do it like a person folding laundry. They do and make the woods hold its breath while they test a zipper like a lock they practice on. We gave the park our photos and our coordinates. That's the end of our part. People want stories to go further than that, but I'm not going to fake one for you. We didn't set out game cams. We didn't go back with a bigger group to see what would happen. We didn't leave bait. We didn't turn this into a hobby. We did what most people do after something brushes the edge of a very old rule. We went home. We watched for the small notice that says someone in charge took it seriously. And we let that be our sign that what we felt in the dark was real enough. If you camp late in the season at Cad's Cove, observe the quiet hours like your life depends on it. Keep your food up. Keep your sight clean. Know a safe word and use it, but don't relax just because you hear it said back to you in a voice you think you know. Don't trust names in the dark. Don't trust a zipper that moves an inch at a time. If you wake up to the sound of a branch straining and the steps that go slow and wide, you are not the only thing that picked that night for the quiet. Make noise when you have to. Stay boring. Leave when daylight gives you the chance. And if you find a buck half buried with its legs bent the wrong way and no clear tracks around it, don't go looking for the story you think you want. The story is already finished. The park will post a notice. The loops will close a little early. Your photos will sit in a folder with a neutral label. You'll keep your ears for the next night you need them. You'll remember that the voice outside your tent knew your middle name before you ever spoke it. That's the warning. That's enough. I booked a one-room rental cabin on the west shore of Burnside Lake to fish walleye in late September and get a few quiet nights away from work. I'm not local. I came up from out of state with a straightforward plan. Morning and evening bites, midday naps, clean what I keep, and stay out of trouble. The cabin sat down a spur off Van Vac Road, 15 minutes from Eliong Highway 169. It had a short dock, a metal fish cleaning table, a tin rowboat with an old outboard, and a bait bucket on a rope. Across a small cove, an old resort looked abandoned, cabins closed, dock stacked on shore, weeds in the gravel. I bought groceries at Zup's Market, ate a late breakfast at Britain's Cafe, and kept to myself. I'd seen a laminated lake map in the cabin that showed Burnside Lodge, the North Arm, and the Boundary Waters line. I was outside the permit area and didn't plan to cross it. I wasn't seeking anything strange. I wanted fish and sleep. On the first evening, I jigged along a sand shelf that curved out from a rocky point. The air had that clean, cold smell you get around tamarack and water that's already cooling for fall. I put one keeper walleye on a stringer, paddled back before full dark, and tied the boat off. While I stowed gear, a blue light moved along the far bank. It was steady, chest height, and it advanced like a person walking with a lantern, except there was no bobbing and no reflection on the water. I stood on my dock and watched it track the shoreline. It paused straight across from me, just far enough that I couldn't make out anything behind it. I said, "We're full," the same way I talk to stray dogs so they don't come up on me. A single word came back from that direction. Full in my own tight vowels, same clipped pace. I shut myself in for the night. I told myself it was sound off the water, though the timing was wrong. Morning was ordinary until I looked at the sand near the ladder. There were long, narrow tracks like an overgrown dog print, but each step had a fifth mark behind it, as if a second heel had pressed in. The stride matched mine. The line of prints began at damp sand, crossed my smooth section, and ended on dry rock with no smudge past it. On the dockboards, for fish heads were arranged nose to cabin in a neat row. They weren't from my fish. The cuts weren't ragged like a snapping turtle's and weren't clean like a knife. Oil had stained the wood in thin dark ovals between each head. I picked them up with a filet glove and tossed them in a trash bag. I scraped the boards, bleached the table, and made a few changes. I dumped my bait water up the path instead of at the shoreline, tied my cooler higher on the wall hook, carried the small fuel can and anchor inside, and smoothed the sand again. It felt like overkill, but I wanted a clear read on anything that walked through while I was gone. I spent the day on the water and caught a couple of smallmouth I released and one more walleye. Coming in at dusk, I saw the blue light again. Same speed down the far bank, same height, same lack of reflection on the lake. I ate, cleaned up, and took my chair out onto the small porch to watch. After 10 minutes, the light stopped across from my dock and held. From that side of the cove, a voice called my mother's name. It used my accent, my rhythm. I sat very still. The voice switched to a clipped male voice I recognized from a news clip I'd watched on my phone at lunch, an old piece about the resort closing. The way he said his own last name was uncommon. The sound that reached me matched it. I lifted the big mag light and threw a beam along my own shoreline. At the edge of the water, a coyote stood up right just long enough to make eye contact. The elbows were tucked in at an angle that didn't look right, and the head sat too high on the body. It dropped to all fours and loped into tamarack. The blue light across the cove did not change. I didn't leave that night, because I do'n't like driving forest to lanes at midnight if I do'n't have to. I braced the door with a chair, set a pan so it would fall if the knob moved, and slept with boots unlaced, and the maggot and knife within reach. I woke once at 2 in the morning to measured steps along the shoreline, wet sand to rock, rock to wet sand, back and forth. There were no heavy thumps, no scratching at the door, no attempt on the windows. It was the sound of patience. I lay still and let it pass. At first light, I went into Ellery. I stopped by City Hall and the St. Louis County Recorder's office to see what was public about the resort. On paper, it still had a living owner, a woman in her 70s, a number for a son forwarded to a local cell. He agreed to meet me on his side of the cove at the chain boat launch around noon. His pickup was already there, a new padlock on the chain that spanned to posts, He didn't waste words. We walked past cabins with padlocks on their doors and shades drawn and past docks stacked like firewood on shore. Weeds grew through gravel. He pointed at rusted bait buckets and said people used to dump minnows and scraps right at the waterline, which drew in raccoons, coyotes, and then things that learned to expect it. We stopped behind the lodge at a nailed-shut cellar bulkhead. The outside boards were clawed, the splinters curled away from the yard. He said animal control had been out 2 summers in a row and didn't find anything they could make a report from. He kept his voice low. He said people around here used a word that isn't from this region, skinwalker, for a thing that learns your voice and favors people staying alone. He said he didn't care what it was called. He cared that the shoreline stayed quiet. I asked why the chain was new. He said they welded it this summer after teenagers started chumming the shallows for photos and late-night dares. Once the water warmed, he said things came across when folks baited. He'd brought motion lights in boxes to mount on 2 corners of the lodge, the top of the launch, and a tree iron siding to break up the dark. He didn't try to scare me. He suggested I cut my trip short or bring a friend. I told him I'd leave the next morning. He nodded at that and wished me a safe drive. Back at my cabin, I packed most of my gear before sunset and left out only what I needed for the night. I wiped surfaces, bleached the fish table again, and coiled the dock rope so it couldn't snag anyone's foot. I set the key in the lockbox on the porch so I wouldn't have to fumble in the morning. I drained my bait water up the path exactly where there was dry duff and no straight downhill to the lake. I ate a quick meal, turned off everything but one lamp, and laid down in my clothes. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and kept the mag light within arm's reach. Just after 2 in the morning, I heard the shoreline steps again, wet to dry, dry to wet. They were not heavy, and they didn't drag. My mother's name came from the water ride in my own cadence. Not loud, not soft, exactly how I'd say it if I was calling her from a room away. I didn't respond. The male voice from the news clip said a short phrase about the resort with the same odd syllable stress. My door did not move. My windows did not rattle. The steps went past 3 or 4 times. Then from outside, my own voice said, "We're full." After that, only the normal lap of water against stones. I waited for gray light before moving. I loaded the truck in 10 minutes. The sand showed the same long narrow prints with that 5th mark behind each step. The row of fish heads was gone. I left the key in the lockbox, pulled onto Van Vack Road, and took Highway 169 back toward town. My hands steadied once I was moving south toward Tower and then the bigger highways. On the drive, I got a voicemail. It came from the cabin's number. It was my voice saying those 2 words. I deleted it and blocked the number. In Ellery, I sent a short email to the owner's contact to say I had checked out early, left the key in the box, and the place was clean. That afternoon, the owner's son replied. He said the motion lights were up. He said they had re-welded the launch chain and posted no bait dumping signs. He didn't add stories, and I didn't ask for any. He wrote that once the first hard frost hits, the shoreline usually goes quiet. I read it twice and felt something shift back toward normal. I decided I was done with solo lake cabins for a while. When I come back to the Iron Range, I'll stay closer to town near Shigawa Lake, fish in daylight, clean at a public station, and pack out scraps. I don't need more proof than I already have. In the weeks after, the small things stuck with me more than the light or the upright coyote. The track shape with the extra mark behind the heel. The line of heads facing the cabin, the way the voice used proper names with the right stress, like it was testing where to put the weight in a sentence. None of it felt random. It felt like a set of steps that had worked before and would keep working if people kept feeding the shoreline and talking back to the water. Calling it a skinwalker doesn't change what you have to do, which is stop rewarding it and stop standing out there at night giving it your voice. Winter came early that year up north. The owner's son sent a short note near Thanksgiving that things had stayed quiet after the first real freeze. That matched what he'd said. There was no last message or new sign. It just went still in the way lakes do once the temperature stays down. I don't think about the blue light most days. When I do, I remember that I said a line I've used 100 times on strays and then heard it back with my own vowels. It taught me enough. I still fish. I just don't go alone, and I keep my night simple. Lights, clean habits, no bait in the water by shore, and no talking to anything that isn't standing on 2 feet on my side of the lake. I live about an hour from Hocking Hills, and when work stacks up, I drive down, do a loop, and drive back. I'm not a guide or anything special. I just know the main trails well enough to move without a map. Late October is my favorite window because the air is colder in the gorge and the leaf color is at its best. On the day this happened, I parked at the Old Man's Cave Visitor Center around 3:30 in the afternoon. I filled my Nalgene at the bottle filler, checked the posted warnings about cliff edges like I always do, and headed for the Grandma Gate with Buckeye Loop that runs to Cedar Falls and back. I had a 20L day with a puffy, a headlamp, a compact first aid kit, a small battery pack with a short USB-C cable, a whistle built into my sternum buckle, and a pocket knife and a front sheath. The plan was a quick 2 to 3 hours and dinner in Logan. Conditions were the kind that looked nice and turned messy. A front pushed through the night before and left the stone steps slick and the leaves soaked. In the gorge, the temperature drops a few degrees and the spray near the falls hangs as a thin mist. Cell service is hit or missed down low. On my way out, I moved past the usual features. Upper Falls, Devil's Bathtub, the CCC stonework, then the wooden foot bridge people call Hemlock Bridge. Family groups and couples were still around, but it was thinning. I checked my watch and figured I had about 90 minutes of good light on the trail floor before it turned dim. She stood in the center of the bridge with her hands on the rail, facing a rock wall instead of the water. Pale blue hoodie, black leggings, trail runners, hair tied up, no pack, no water, no phone in her hand that I could see. I had the usual half second of reading the scene. Someone waiting for a photo. Someone thinking. Someone on a call with a bud in their ear I couldn't see. When I stepped up to pass, she turned without moving her feet. Her first words were practical. Do you have a charger? I'm at 5% and I'm bad with directions. I did have one. I carry a Palm Seas battery because I take too many photos and my phone dies fast in the cold. I said, sure, and handed her the battery with a short cable attached. She didn't thank me. She plugged in, slid the battery into the front pouch of the hoodie, and said, can you walk me back to the lot? I keep taking wrong turns. It wasn't a big ask, and I was headed that direction anyway. We started toward the next wayfinding post. I expected her to pick the straighter line toward the visitor center. At the post, she pointed to the spur that drops into a narrower corridor that I knew would add time. Shortcut, she said like she'd used it before. It bothered me, but not enough to start an argument with a stranger about routes. I let it go. We walked on. I noticed small things I tried to explain away. I was sweating lightly and she wasn't. Her face stayed dry and her breathing never changed. The leaves were thick and wet and should have made noise. I could hear my own feet. I couldn't hear hers. Trail runners can be quiet and wet leaf mats deaden sound. So I told myself that was all it was. She asked what I drove so she could spot it in the lot. She asked if I post hikes the same day or later. She mentioned that the visitor center monitor shows fresh Instagram photos and said it was cool how some of them showed the parking area. It sounded like small talk, but it was precise in a way that didn't fit the rest of her flat tone. Whenever other hikers came around a bend, she slowed until they passed. When they were gone, she sped up. She stayed a half step behind my right shoulder. It's an odd place to settle in with someone you just met because it gives a view of zippers and strap loops. Twice, she reached toward the battery while talking like she was about to hand it back and then didn't. The cord stayed looped across her hand. We came to a low sandstone overhang I'd seen before but never stopped at. It's one of those shallow recesses with a damp ceiling and a natural bench of rock. People duck in there when it rains. The air under it felt colder. I checked my watch out of habit. It was 4:55. I was past the point where I should have turned toward the lot if I wanted easy light the whole way. I need my charger back, I said. I held out my hand. She tilted her head a little and said, "You can get it from my car." She showed a small smile that didn't reach her eyes and didn't show teeth. It wasn't an embarrassed smile or a joking one. There was nothing in it. I felt a tug against my shoulder strap. At some point while we were walking, she had threaded the short cable through a stitched loop on my strap and kept the battery in her pouch. It turned my own gear into a handle. She pulled once hard, like she was testing how much resistance I'd give. The move was simple and practiced. It would read as an accident if somebody walked up in the next second. To people tangled in a cord, nothing to see. I pulled my pocket knife from the sheath on my pack and cut the cable. The battery dropped into the wet leaves. She didn't try to grab me or make a scene. She just yanked the loose cord with the dead plug on the end and watched me rock back a step. I put distance between us and said louder than I meant that we were done and I was heading to the main trail. "Stay on trail," she said, the same flat tone. It could have been a helpful reminder. It felt like a line she used to reset people. I called out, "Hello," toward the brighter side of the corridor in case anybody was nearby. The gorge gave my voice back the way it does down there, flatter and closer than it should sound. It's not the echo people imagine. It's like the high parts of your voice get eaten, and what's left doesn't carry. I moved out of the overhang and chose the broadest, brightest path I could see. I didn't run. I kept a steady pace and checked my kit as I went, because that's what I do when something pushes me off routine. Phone, wallet, knife. The knife was gone. My hand hit the empty sheath and felt a piece of paper sitting in it where the handle should have been. I pulled it out without stopping. It was a hardware store receipt from my town, time-stamped that morning. It had the last 4 digits of my card printed on the bottom. I hadn't bought anything that day. The receipt had been folded neat and pushed into the sheath in the time since ID left the visitor center. I don't know when she did it. I do know that the only time she had a reason to be close to my shoulder was when she walked behind it and when she adjusted the cord. I kept moving. At a post, I chose the direction with the arrow back to Old Man's Cave instead of towards Cedar Falls. I made myself think like I do when I'm tired and want a sure line. Look for boots scuffing the right edge. Look for lighter stone with more foot traffic. Smell for food. And sunscreen near the lot. I found a section where the path widened and the sound changed. Voices carried better. A dog barked ahead. A couple in windbreakers came toward me. I said I needed to walk with them to the lot because something was off and I didn't want to be alone on that spur. They said yes right away. The woman said they'd heard faint singing near Upper Falls earlier. Not a tune she recognized, just a rise and fall of a few notes repeated. We reached the area near the visitor center and I went straight to a ranger truck that was still in the lot. 2 rangers were there. I gave them the description and the sequence in order. I didn't add anything extra. I told them about the charger the wrong turns toward darker corridors, the cord threaded through my strap, the overhang, the smile, the flat way she said that line, the cut cable, the way the gulch flattened my voice, and the planted receipt and missing knife. They took it seriously. They bagged the cut cable and the receipt and photographed the strap loop and my hands. I called the number on my card and told the bank what happened. The fraud team told me there had been a small gas purchase in Logan earlier that afternoon. Different zip code from my town. Same last 4. They froze the card. One of the rangers told me they'd had other reports that month. A woman around dusk. She asks for something that forces proximity. A charger, a sip of water, a look at a paper map she can hold. Then she suggests a shortcut that leads into thinner foot traffic where there aren't as many casual passers-by. No weapon shown, no yelling. She waits for gaps between groups and closes space. The ranger said he was surprised my shouts felt dead because the gorge acoustics take the bite out of high sounds, and the leaf mat eats foot noise both ways. He said a hiker had come in the week before saying a camera strap ended up woven through his sternum strap without him noticing. Same hoodie color, same kind of flat effect, same time of day. They drove loops through the lots while I gave a more formal statement to a deputy. I went home with the windows cracked to keep the car from feeling too quiet. When I got home, I emptied my pack and checked every pocket and seemed like I'd never seen it before. Nothing else was missing. The only new thing was that receipt. I put it in a drawer. 2 days later, a deputy called me a little after lunch. A state trooper and county deputies had stopped a small sedan at a rest area off US 33 between Logan and Lancaster after a clerk called in multiple small card declines. The driver matched my description. They found a folded pale blue hoodie on the passenger seat, trail runners on the floor with sandstone grit caked in the treads. In the center console, there was a stack of compact power banks and short cables, 3 clip knives with common outdoor brands, a handful of zip ties, a roll of athletic tape, and a cheap handheld radio set to a family channel. On the backseat floor, there was a folder with printouts of public Instagram posts under the Hocking Hills tag. Some had circles around vehicles and notes like red Subaru, white Tacoma with topper, blue Civic, sticker back window. They also had a paper map of the park with pencil dots on tight spots where sight lines break and traffic thins near Hemlock Bridge, the squeeze past Devil's Bathtub, a blind curve above Cedar Falls. The deputy said the gas charge in Logan tied back to one of the clone numbers they recovered. Later on, the pump in my town showed signs that it had been fitted with a temporary skimmer at some point. He couldn't tell me more than that, and I didn't need more. They asked me to come in and identify anything that might be mine. I recognized my battery pack by a small scrape on one corner where it fell on rock earlier in the year. They photographed it and then released it to me with an evidence sticker. Weeks later, after comparison work, they released the knife. The scratch pattern near the pivot matched the one in my photos at home. The case moved forward on fraud and identity charges, and there was an unlawful restraint count in another report. The park barred her pending trial. That part is for the prosecutor and the court. I don't have a say in it. The ranger who first took my statement called me again and gave me plain advice. Don't post photos until I'm home. Remove geotags, crop plates and landmarks in lot shots. Don't tell strangers in the parking area what I drive or where I'm parked. If someone asks for something that becomes a tether, short cable, camera strap, don't hand it over. If I feel boxed into a darker spur by social pressure, sit and let the person go or link up with a group and move with them. He reminded me that whistles carry better than shouts in those corridors because of the way the sound behaves. So, keep mine handy and use it instead of yelling if I need help. None of it was dramatic. It was the kind of safety talk you remember because it's simple. A month later, I went back with a friend. We went at midday. We walked the same loop on Hemlock Bridge. I put my hand on the rail in the spot where I'd stood. The boards flexed a little under other people's steps. The water noise was normal. Kids laughed. Shoes squeaked. Nothing felt charged. It felt like a place I know. We finished the loop and ate in town. That night at home, I wrote this up and posted it on the hiking subreddit as a caution. I left out anything extra and stuck to what happened and what I learned. It got passed around more than I expected. A ranger account commented with the line he'd given me on the phone. Don't hand strangers tethers. That's the whole thing. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't a hero. I was selected. And then I was careful enough and lucky enough to step out of it before it got worse. The part that stays with me is the receipt in the sheath and the tug on the strap. Both are proof that someone can step into your space without you clocking it when you re in a place you trust. I still hike alone sometimes, but I changed a few habits. I switched to a long breakaway cable I can drop without cutting. I moved the knife into a zippered pocket and built a touch check routine at junctions. I turned off auto geotagging. I wait until I'm home to post. I cross bridges in daylight when I can. I make eye contact and say no when no is the right answer. I keep the evidence sticker on the battery pack. It's not a trophy. It's a reminder that simple moves and small items can trap you. When I feel that old habit to be helpful push me past my instincts, I think about that short cord woven through my own gear and how easily I accepted it. That's enough to slow me down and make better choices. I go back to Hocking Hills because it's part of my routine. I give the place the respect it asks for. I don't look for monsters, I look for tactics, and when I cross Hemlock Bridge now, I look at the water like everyone else. And then I look down at my straps and I keep walking. I had been to Whitaker Point a couple times in daylight, never overnight. My partner and I picked a weekday in early November because we wanted the overlook to ourselves in the morning and figured the cold would keep people home. We stopped in Boxley Valley to watch elk at dusk, then drove the rest of the way up Cave Mountain Road. The air kept getting colder and the wind came in steady pulses you could time. At Low Gap, a cashier joked about the night wind and said to skip the overhangs after the first hard frost. I smiled, but a lighter I didn't really need, and told myself the story was a tourist line. In the parking lot at the Whitaker Point trailhead, we reviewed our rule the same way we always did after a scare years ago. If anything strange happened after dark, we would not look for the official trail. We would go by the fastest line, straight down a drainage to the road. No stopping to pack, no debating over gear. We even had a phrase for it, straight line. So, we wouldn't lose time explaining. We took the spur out as the light dropped. Only one other truck sat in the lot, with frost on the tailgate and an empty dog crate in the bed. The first quarter mile felt normal. Oak leaves were slick. Hickory shells popped under our boots. A cold rock smell came up from the bluff. Here and there, I saw orange flagging where people had cut aside overlooks. Some strips were torn. We stepped off the spur to a flat bench behind bare oaks and found an old fire ring. I scattered the ash and set our little stove away from it. We kept weight low. A 2% tent, headlamps, a paper map, a printed topo, where I had traced to drainages with a marker and trekking poles laid flat by the door with the straps open. I checked my phone. No service. I shut it off to save power. My partner wrote our names and plate on a half sheet and slid it under the dash. While the water heated, a single short cough came from back in the timber. Not a throat clear, not a buck snort, wet and short, and then nothing. I told myself it was a deer, and went back to stirring. We ate, hung the food bag low on a dead limb so we could grab it fast if we needed to, and talk through the plan one more time. The wind hit on a schedule. Every few minutes, a harder pulse moved through the branches. I started doing small jobs between gusts without thinking about it. Right before we zipped in, I saw faint muddy toe marks on a rock near the path to the bluff. 5 toes widespread. I decided they were from a barefoot hiker earlier in the day. We climbed into the tent. Nylon hissed. The guidelines ticked. Off to the left. The same cough came again, closer by a little. We said nothing. We went still and let the wind settle. I woke sometime after midnight to breathing right outside the rainfly. It was slow and wet. 3 long pulls and a pause. Then another pull. It stayed fixed near the zipper instead of moving around the tent. The air inside tasted metallic and damp, like gold coins had been rubbed on my tongue. The tent wall pushed in with a flat pressure, the way a hand would press if the fingers were together. It held for a count and eased off. I whispered the plan. My partner whispered it back. While they did, my name came from the other side of the fabric in a voice that had my partner's cadence, but not the pitch. It was almost right, like a recording played a little slow. I clicked the lantern on low. A shadow rose across the tent wall. It looked like shoulders at first, my height. Then the top kept climbing without the bottom shifting. I watched for the sound of a step. Nothing. The zipper pull on the outside twitched twice. Small tests like someone learning the direction of the teeth. From farther off came a dry clack like a jaw closing on something hard. The cough followed that. The breathing moved to the back of the tent. Leaves made noise without the snap of twigs. The weight was wrong for the sound, heavy but quiet. My partner's watch beeped the hour, 2 beats later. The same little beep sounded from behind us, polite and exact, only in the wrong place. We waited for it to circle again. It didn't. The pressure came back near the zipper. The pull clicked once more. I counted down with my fingers. On go, we shoved our trekking poles low through the fabric at shin height. The tip of mine hit something dense. A sound came back that didn't match a person. Half deer bleat, half air caught in a throat. The pressure went off the wall, and we were already moving. We ripped the door, left the lantern on, grabbed headlamps, and ran for the dark V of trees where the drainage dropped. I said, "Straight line." My partner nodded and went first. The slope gave out fast, and we sat down to slide. Leaf litter carried us like a belt, quiet and quick, boots breaking on cold roots. Above us, something moved with fewer steps than we needed. We stopped behind a log to listen. It stopped. I threw a fist-sized rock uphill. It landed and rolled, then settled. After 3 counts, a soft step sounded too close to be where that rock had gone. I called the name of a deputy I knew in Kingston and said we had service and were calling. The voice on the slope answered with my partner's tone, trying the deputy's name like a new word, stretching it wrong. The smell came down on the wind, stronger than before, metallic and damp, with a sweet rot that reminded me of a meat cooler after a power cut. The first lip into the drainage was deeper than the contour line suggested. We eased down by feeling for shale ledges with our palms. A long exhale came from above us, steady and annoyed, like a word without letters. We hit the bottom and found ankle-deep water. We stepped in and stayed in it to kill our noise. Leaves moved under the film of water. Our headlamp showed just enough to place feet. Something paced the rim parallel to us, not dropping in, matching our speed with a fraction of our effort. Once or twice, small rocks clicked off the bank near my shoulder. They didn't roll. They struck and fell flat. Like a weak throw from the dark, a tangle of dead cedar lay across the channel ahead. Long hair or moss hung from it in a curtain, and it carried the same metallic odor. I brushed some aside. It stuck to my glove and left a brown smear. We moved until the cold made my shins ache. A voice from downstream said, "This way," in my voice, but soft, off by a breath. I looked at my partner. They shook their head. We stayed in the water. On a sandbar, we saw a fresh deer track next to 5 toe impressions that were human length. The toe marks had a pulled look as if something had pressed and then corrected the shape. We pushed on until the drainage tightened into a culvert under Cave Mountain Road. We crawled through on hands and knees and came out onto gravel that glittered with frost in our lights. My breath showed as smoke. On the shoulder, a set of barefoot prints led away. Long toes spilled, heels split like cracked clay. The toe off dug deeper than the heel, like the weight had been forward on each step. We followed the road to the trailhead. No one else was there. We got into our car. I locked the doors, then locked them again without meaning to. I turned on the hazards and drove toward Kingston with the clicking as a metronome. We parked under the street light by the store and sat upright with our packs on our laps. I slept in slips a few minutes at a time and came awake to every passing truck. At sunup, we used the payphone by the bulletin board to call the Newton County Sheriff's Office. A deputy met us at the trailhead with a Forest Service tech in a green pickup. We walked in together. The deputy kept it easy, but his eyes stayed on our hands. The tech carried a camera and clipboard and said they were looking at erosion impacts near the overlook. Our tent was where we left it. The door was unzipped neatly, no torn mesh or popped teeth, just a clean line like someone inside had done it. The lantern was dead on the floor. The stove sat in the vestibule, cold and dry. A deer jaw lay on my partner's knit hat, teeth up, picked clean to white, except for a faint pink at the joint. A wide, smooth drag mark circled the tent. A single loop like a hose had been pulled around it, and then it went to the edge of a boulder and stopped. Past that, nothing, as if whatever made it had stepped out of the mark and into air. There were no boot prints near our site, only those long bare feet and odd toe marks. The deputy crouched and used a pen to measure one stride. He didn't say the number. The tech took photos and said dispersed sites near the crag would be closed before winter for resource protection. On the hike out, new orange flagging showed up low on branches, steering people away from the edges. One strip had tiny tooth dents along the edge, neat and close, the way a bored kid might mark a straw. Back in the lot, the other truck with the dog crate was gone. A brown smear cut across the frost melt on the tailgate like someone had wiped a hand through it. We drove to Panka and ordered breakfast we barely touched. A local guide I knew from float trips asked why we looked wrecked. I told him the short version, without trying to sell it. He told us not to argue with the season. He said some things don't cross running water, and after the first hard frost, the wind brings older traffic along the ridge. He said to keep metal close, to keep our voices low, and to carry salt. We nodded. It sounded like something people say to make you feel less foolish. It also lined up with how the night had moved on us. We went back a week later in daylight for a simple walk to the overlook. There were more people than I expected on a weekday. New laminated notices asked everyone to stay on the main trail and avoid camping near the crag for erosion and safety. The air felt normal until a gust crossed the ridge. The metallic taste touched my tongue for half a second like a memory. I didn't bring it up. My partner didn't either. At home, we cleaned our gear in the garage. The knit hat went into a trash bag because the smell never washed out. We didn't keep a reminder. We didn't take pictures of the jaw or the tracks or the drag mark. It wasn't a story we wanted to win points with. We changed how we hike. We carry small packets of salt in the top of the pack and keep a few in the glove box. I don't make a scene of it, but I put a pinch down at trailheads when the air has that hard, cold feel. I rewrote our emergency plan onto a single card. Mark a straight line exit. Run water when possible. Ignore mimic calls. No filming. No arguments. Go. The card sits by my ID on rough nights. I set my trekking poles by the bedroom door and touch the metal tips before I switch off the light. It's a ritual that helps. I don't tell people to avoid Whitaker Point. I tell them what we did, what we heard, how we left, and I tell them to respect the drainages and the hour when your gut goes still. If a voice that almost sounds like someone you love speaks from the wrong side of a zipper, move toward water and don't stop to check footprints. We have not spent another night on that ridge. We hike it early with other people on clear days. Keep back from the edge and leave before the shadows get long. I think the cold wakes up old roots that don't care about our maps. I don't need a name for whatever used the wind to learn our voices. I need rules that work, and we have them now. We keep today light, keep a straight way out, and keep quiet about anything that wants a reply.